It feels like forever waiting for the double-barreled tanks, and of course we can't wait forever. So today we're going to be looking at the PC version of the double-barreled tanks and what they're all about, what you should know before they come into World of Tanks console in 2023. Yes, we are going to have to wait until 2023 to get a tank line that was probably released on PC about 2 years ago, something like that, just under that I expect, but by the time they get released I expect it's 2 years, unfortunately, but nonetheless we're going to see an amazing replay here by the Bayor. He is going to be having a once in a kind of very long amount of games replay here. And these do not come along all too much. Now, we're looking at the Tier 8 premium version of the tech tree, or at least not the tech tree, but the variants of these double-barrel tanks. So we're going to see what they're all about, how you can use them really well in the game, what their typical uses are when you're playing up against some of your opponents, and how they kind of vary to some of the more traditional Soviet heavy tanks. Now, you can already see here that these tanks, much like the kind of Italian auto reloader tanks, have this kind of auto reloader mechanic whereby you can fire one shell in your magazine, then reload it, and then you can have two maximum within your tank. So it's almost like a double pumper, and of course this is a double pumper because if you do decide that you are going to load standard both rounds, then you'll be able to fire them off at the same time, which is kind of what the double-barreled tanks are all about, is that you can hit people twice in one go. Now, if you do decide to do that, the problem is that both of the shells go off at the same time, and then you end up with a super long reload. The time between reloading your first shell and your second shell decreases, so your first shell takes longer to reload, and then your second shell takes less time to reload. So you want to be keeping only one round in your magazine. You don't typically want to be firing off both unless you really do have to. So typically that's what people do play these tanks like, and where you have to be very careful about when you are firing both of those rounds and should you wish to. Now, the key thing about having the double pumper is that when you do get the opportunity, or you're in a clutch situation where maybe you played something like, for example, the Defender, where you just don't have the alpha damage to finish someone off and therefore you end up getting taken out as a result, that doesn't typically happen in this vehicle because you get an extra shell, which means that as long as both shells penetrate, then you're going to be able to actually deal the damage and therefore get away with it. So that is the key difference between this and something else, is that yes, you will be able to fire both shells at once and so double your damage in the shell. So it depends on what tier that you're playing, dependent on the damage per shell. Obviously, this vehicle I believe has 390 damage per shell on average, and you can fire off 2 shells with this tank, which makes 720 your total average damage, and we can actually double check that within this replay. You can see 390 damage, and you can also see the penetration of the vehicle in the game. You can see that it has 221mm on its standard rounds, which is okay, nothing too major, so you have to be a little bit careful when deciding what you want to do with this tank against some of the other heavy tanks that you'll be facing. But if you do decide that you are going to fire off both shells, you have to make sure that you pen, and therefore a lot of the time people are firing premium rounds. Now, one thing that you saw there is that both rounds bounced off of the Caro P88, and that's probably the downside of actually loading standard rounds for once. Well, not for once, but the negatives of actually loading standard rounds in games, and you'd see that less and less on World of Tanks PC. I think console players have got it pretty easy. Not everyone actually exclusively fires premium on console, which is nice to actually see, but on PC it seems the other way around. The key thing you want to note about these double-barreled tanks is that the armor model is also pretty nice. The turrets typically are pretty good. There are some weak points, so much like the STI's stock turret, there are some kind of turret weak points where you can actually pen above, and we can actually zoom in here. Up here you can see that there's a cupola on both sides. You can pen these. The upper bit here can be overmatched by some certain tanks within the game, but not all. You've got to have a pretty high caliber, and then of course you kind of get this boxy frontal armor if you've played the kind of what's it called, the Scourge or the Kirovets, or, you know, that tank, it's got the same sort of frontal armour. It doesn't get the pike nose that the typical Soviet tanks do within World of Tanks, so you don't get the IS-3 pike nose, which is a little bit troll, but that doesn't really matter because you can angle a little bit more with this vehicle comparatively to those. And I typically like to call this the Slug, as it's pretty lumbering, it's pretty ogreish, and typically doesn't do all too well when you're having to move around. Luckily, this map is Ruinberg, for those of you who don't know what this is. It is on console as well, so you are able to actually play it whenever Wargaming decide to actually re-release the map back onto the game. However long that will be is unknown, much like the actual introduction of these tanks. I believe Wargaming are typically, well, supposedly aiming to release them early 2023, but, you know, Wargaming's timescales, it'd probably be 2024 somehow, and they just got the dates mixed up, because apparently that's what's typically, well, that's what's going on at the minute, is for some reason they're kind of just losing the plot with their kind of awareness of what they're actually supposedly doing. You can see here the VK is trying to escape, and this is where having the double barrels is perfect, because you would have only been able to get off one shot with another Soviet heavy there, and now you're not going to be firing off any rounds for the next like 30 seconds. So having the fact that you have to reload both shells is not really a negative with this vehicle comparatively, because you're not really losing anything. You can play this as a single shot if you really want to, and that's that's the best way to play it if you want to do the most damage. But of course, it was always nice to have the card up your sleeve where you can fire both off at the same time. Now, within this replay, as we've been talking about the tanks, showcasing what they're all about, the typical armor model, the Bayor here has managed to pick up 6,000 damage, which is very, very good indeed. And he's also blocked 3,500 damage. Bearing in mind, this is a tier 8 game, so you do come up against tier 10s with this vehicle, and, you know, throughout the tech tree lines, it's obviously +2, -2, so you're going to be taking a lot of damage when you are the lower tiers. These tanks do not have a troll armor. They are not an Object 279E, but they definitely have enough armor to kind of bounce at their respective tiers, and the lower tier tanks that you'll be coming up against very well, especially if you angle and use all of your knowledge of armor and stuff like that within the game already. Now, there you go, a annoying mistake, firing the heat rounds into the back of the Centurion there, which has definitely been a pain. Yeah, the problem with firing premium rounds sometimes, but nonetheless, you can see the reload here, 19 seconds to fully reload this vehicle from 0, so it's very, very long. And of course, as you go from the first round to the second round, it decreases in time, much like we've talked about before, but at least you can see the example. Now, in this replay, it is now a 2 versus 3 scenario, and this is one that you typically don't really want to be in this vehicle, because you don't have the kind of output damage that you can consistently deal to the tanks that are going to be coming towards you, and especially if they come all at once, there is no way in hell that you can just fend them off for the entire time, so you have to rely upon your armor at that point, and just making sure that you're in a position that is just beneficial for your tank rather than trying to out DPM things, because it's just not going to happen with the double barreled tanks, and that is why you get double barreled. You of course need to negate something other than just gaining an extra round, so that's kind of where it comes in, and why they can be a little bit painful to play at some points, where you just feel like maybe you haven't got to the damage, or maybe you just haven't been able to consistently keep yourself in the fight, which means that you're only ever able to get one shot off, and yeah, when you have terrible DPM, it's not particularly great. Now, talking about coming one by one, both of them don't come by one, and the Tiger 131 and the what's it called, the T28 Concept decide to come around at the same time. Now, he shuts down the Concept, and you see that the Tiger 131 has now backed away whilst he's capturing the base. The Scorpion is behind, and that is not the Scorpion G or the Scorpion Tier 8 tank destroyer. That is in fact the M56 Scorpion, the Tier 7 kind of really weakly armoured tank, so you can effectively load HE should you really wish to, and maybe we'll see that as this game progresses if he can manage to take out this heavy tank being the Tiger 131. Now, one thing that you'll note is that coming up against the Tiger 131, it can definitely be beneficial to kind of load the heat rounds and use the double pump, because that will enable him to then turn around against the Scorpion if he can. Now, he does spot the Tiger 131, he is behind him, which is a little bit of a pain. He's going to swing around, see if he can catch a round into the Tiger. Unfortunately, he kind of whiffs that shot and he doesn't fully aim, which is probably a negative. Maybe he could have done that and would have been more likely to actually hit. I know it's a rush scenario, but he definitely needs to do something. The Scorpion kind of gets caught out by surprise, and he comes around that corner, manages to clip a shot in. Can't really do that on console. The accuracy is just not kind of active enough, or at least sensitive enough to really be able to do that consistently. Yes, you still can do it, but yeah, just trying to do that with the controller is a lot more difficult, and so you probably won't be able to do that, which means that this tank is probably going to be worse than what you're seeing here. Now, he does get the back, and here we go, the double pump. Doesn't decide to actually use the double pump, and instead decides he's now going to go after the Tiger 131, and he shuts him down. The Scorpion appears from behind, and that is not a tank you want to sit in front of, because that vehicle does in fact have 240 alpha damage. We've done a video on it recently on console, so if you actually want to have a look at it and what it does really well, then you can. But yeah, it definitely doesn't do well when you decide to ram it. It's a very, very, very fun game. Now, I hope I gave a good introduction to the double-barreled tanks and what they're really like on PC. Of course, if you want to check them out yourself, then you will have to download the PC game. They'll be coming out on console in probably a long time, about 6 months or so, before you'll be able to probably get your hands on these, and that is given Wargaming's current statement on them, being that they haven't really started 100% working on them, and they're probably more focused on Cold War anyway, but at least it gives you a good idea of what these tanks are like should you wish to jump onto PC and play them. But yes, this is the premium version. This will likely be the first double barrel tank to come onto console, and then they'll re-release the entire tech tree. So yeah, good luck, and I hope that these come soon. Let me know what you think of them, and if you want me to cover any more World War II tanks on PC, then let me know in the comment section down below as well, and subscribe if you're not. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.